This is what happened last time. I set off on the journey. We saw a barge. We saw another barge. We saw another barge. We avoided a telling off.
You could say thank you. Tell him next time. Oh, it so irritates me.
And we rode 126 feet over the River Dee before arriving in Llangollen. We'd now completed approximately half our route and were now about to start the second phase with the mighty climb up to Castell Dinas Bran. Without a chance to look around Llangollen and maybe sample a luxury sausage roll, we continued on our journey. Though as we approached Castell Dinas Bran, I knew that we'd only done the easy bit. As soon as we left the road, the gradient increased almost instantly through a series of narrow paths with various different surfaces. I'd ridden up to the castle before, but had forgotten how steep it actually was. I was probably 15 years younger at that time as well. I began to notice an underlying theme developing, which involved Rich steaming ahead and me lagging way behind. It was starting to get really hot now, as you can see. I thought I'd stay covered up though. And anyway, I didn't have any sunblock with me. As we pushed on, all I could see was sky. And just as I thought my knees were going to burst, the gradient levelled off, and in the distance I could even spy a little downhill section.
Oh yeah.
It appeared though that Rich hadn't even broken into a sweat. For myself, however, things were a little bit different.
I think I've got altitude sickness.
We were looking at a plume of smoke in the distance when a walker passed by and started a conversation, later followed by her husband.
Yes, thanks.
About to go?
Well, you shouldn't push up.
It's building up some energy.
Which was perfect timing, because the longer it went on, the more time I'd have to rest.
It is.
So last, I thought summer was over after that last load of rain. It's the usual way, isn't it?
It's been a bit poor this week, hasn't it? Apart from today.
Down, some of our friends went up different way to us this week, and they had storms. They went down. We went one way, and they went the other way.
Yeah.
And they had torrential rain. We didn't have any.
Wow.
I do. Well, I've been at the coast the last few weeks. We had nothing there. And I came home yesterday, and I mean, on the bottom of our new garage had all flooded, and it hasn't flooded in 20 odd years that I've lived there. Big thick layer of silt in it, but at least it didn't go in the house.
Oh, that's good.
It's been that dry, see, because all the grass has just covered all the drains. And
well, we're up from Dorset, and it's very, very dry.
Yeah.
Very dry. There's one part, I think it's Surrey or somewhere. They've hardly had anything.
Wow.
Absolutely anything.
We've had nothing here for about 8 weeks.
Not a great deal.
8 weeks apart from that downpour the other day, and a little bit the week before that. That's been it. Yeah. First mountain fire I've seen anyway.
Oh yes, I first noticed that. We were trying to think to see where the train was going, but we found out in the end you could see where it was moving along, but I noticed that.
The train goes straight down the valley, along into Corwin, Carrock.
So we've been up to someone up to some big bike train who's got all the gear like you yesterday. I don't know.
Llandegla,
From here.
probably.
Well, there's a few. There's Llandegla,
Oh,
there's one giant leap that's over the other end, Llangollen.
Got a feeling he might have gone in that direction.
There's loads. I mean, I've lived here all my life. So
Oh right.
there's the Clwydian Range, the Wayfarers Path.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's quite attractive, this rock.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lee Scartman, yeah. There's all walks across the top there. Go right the way round into Will's End and then back at the other end onto the moor.
Over that side.
Over that side, yeah.
Just at the end of our week, just about walked. Started off with the Snowdonian Marathon.
Wow.
Getting too old for this now. We did run up here a couple of days ago.
Wow.
But walking.
Yeah.
That's why I went away last week to the coast. He said, well, so me, I was just out cycling every day. So the first week leaving the bike at all, just a load of walking, so that's what we've done. Right,
Very good.
Right, enjoy the rest of your week.
Yeah. See ya.
And with my legs still protesting, it was time to move on. As usual, Rich was full steam ahead, but at least there was a little bit of downhill to look forward to. However, this was to be short-lived. The castle sits roughly at 320 metres high, with a zigzag path which is roughly 1.25 miles long. And looking from the air, it doesn't look that steep, but it looks a lot steeper from below when you're heading up. I could easily remember this path from roughly 15 years ago, and it was very difficult then, so I wasn't expecting an easy time this time. Though I did know that it would be worth it once I got to the top. The castle dates back as far as 600 BC and was originally an Iron Age fort. The first documented evidence of the castle dates back to the 12th century. I couldn't believe how quickly Rich disappeared into the distance. And even though we were running downhill, I still couldn't keep up. Rich started the climb to the top, passing some walkers on their way down. Eventually, I started my way up. Rich was nowhere to be seen. I didn't feel that I could have ridden up. Even just pushing the bike was hard enough. But no such problems for Rich, big show-off git. He managed to pedal the whole way up. I continued to climb, with each step harder than the last. Rich was getting ever nearer to the top, and making it all look effortless. As did I, only deciding to stop to take in the amazing view. I wasn't out of breath at all, that's just acting. For dramatic effect. Okay, that's a lie, I was dead on my feet. And if you listen carefully, you can actually hear my chest camera picking up my rapid heartbeat. Meanwhile, Richard made it to the top, and didn't even appear to be out of breath. Not so much for me, though at least I could see the top, and I knew the end was in sight. I continued to climb, and soon I was there, at the top. By now, the heat was stifling, burning me up from inside. The sweat was coming from each and every pore, and I thought to myself, I don't want to be here no more. That should be any more, actually. You might want to have a look at your grammar, Mr. Kershaw.
It's got a bit of sausage in it. What you might want to do is to just stay down there. Down there you want to be, boys.
It was all a big joke for Rich, though, and I think he was suggesting that I should have stayed at the bottom. Though looking down onto Llangollen, I couldn't believe how far we'd come, and how high we were.
I've not seen it.
It's on YouTube, free.
And I'd been proven right. The views were spectacular. In every direction, you could see for miles, and I looked to see if I could spot the aqueduct in the distance. And for that reason alone, if you're ever thinking of making a hill fort yourself, put it on a really high hill where you can see all around you, and you'll be able to see the enemy coming far in the distance. Okay, so they say altitude can affect cognitive performance. So here's an intellectual conversation for you.
I've got 3, but they'll all be 1.
Good grief.
That was a grueler, that, getting up here.
Sorry. It's just a bit hot. Rather than physically endurance, it's heat endurance, isn't it? I'm used to that shit.
I'm not carrying an extra 20 kilos.
Actually, what would that take your weight to?
25 kilos.
No, in stones.
How much is 20 kilos?
14 pound in a stone. 2.2 pound in a kilo.
So what's the answer?
2.2 kilo. No, hang on, let me get this
Tell me
right.
the answer.
2.2 kilos
Not working it out.
is 1 pound.
Who do you think I am? Carol
No.
Vaudeville?
No. No, hang on. 2.2. No, that's not right.
You can use your fingers if you want.
2.2, so say 2. 2 pounds is 1 kilo. Right? 2 pounds is 1 kilo.
Right.
So 14
Just
pounds is
40
7.
pounds.
So 7 kilos is a stone.
Right.
I reckon 20 kilos, so call it 21. That's 3 stone.
Put your phone.
No. So that's 3 stone. Now where are you?
About 9.5 now.
So you're carrying 12.5 stone. I'm
Yeah.
11.5 stone. I reckon this is 6. So it's about 2. So you can't use that excuse. So your combined weight of you in your bag or me in my bag is probably identical.
When I thought about it later, and if I accepted that the combined weight of me and the equipment equalled that of Rich, and were therefore the same weight, he was actually used to carrying that weight, where I wasn't. So therefore I estimate that without that handicap, I would have left him for dust, though it remained a bone of contention for some time, though I knew I was right. It's a very popular place to visit, and there were a lot of visitors on this day, though the local residents stayed out of everyone's way and waited for everyone to go home. Now, I wasn't aware of this, but it seems that Rich is a bit of an amateur historian, and he imparted some fascinating local history that I'd never heard before.
Twins. Local legend has it that a man from the village down there bred with a fox. Their offspring became a fox twin because they were two. The locals hounded them up one night and stuck them in that there dungeon. From then on, the legend of the fox twins has continued. Once in a while, generally of a summer's evening, the fox twins are seen in the local village where they'll steal some of the local children. They'll bring them up here and all that will be found in the next morning is a pile of bones, gnawed to death by one of the fox twins. Sleep easy. Good night.
Now, since filming this, I've researched the area, trying to find any evidence of what Rich told us, but unfortunately was unable to find anything. So it seems that Rich is one step ahead of everybody else. All those professional historians want to take a leaf out of his book and dig deeper to find out what really went on back in the day. It was time to move on. Our next stop was the Aglusig, the rocky outcrop that can be seen in the distance, and I knew that this would be another mammoth climb. But I seem to remember from my previous journey that before the climb there was some good old-fashioned downhill, which is my favourite kind of hill. As this is something Rich does quite a bit, he was keen to show me something he'd seen on his last trip, and I excitedly wondered what treat I was in for. As we got closer, Rich told me that it was a small monument that someone had drawn a picture of a gentleman's sausage on.
Bit of an anticlimax. If you pardon the pun.
We got to the monument, but unfortunately it was bad news. Someone had removed the picture of the gentleman's sausage. What a disappointment. I thought we were supporting local artists. Oh well, never mind. At least this looked like the downhill section that I recalled from my last visit. Or maybe not.
Why you go so slow?
Did they recently change it and put loads of paths in? Anyway, another gravel path. Better get on with it. We approached a foreboding looking gate with what looked like a crow on it, and I don't mind saying it gave me the willies. I thought it was a real crow, but I think it was made of metal. It didn't move when we opened the gate anyway.
I thought it was like a nice straight run. Look that fucking straight.
Or perhaps it was one of those right hard crows. You know, the ones that aren't afraid of humans.
Shout to him. Say, oi, you!
I started to wonder where all this lovely sweet downhill had gone. I seem to remember it just being a hillside, and not an undulating gravel path with wooden steps, for added difficulty. In the distance, I could see the nice downhill bit, the bit with no gravel and no wooden steps, the bit I'd been looking forward to. I could go flat out down here without a care in the world. Unfortunately though, there seemed to be a walker right on the line that we'd need to take. I couldn't believe it. I'd waited all day for this. As we navigated another set of wooden steps, I could see the Igloosig in the distance. It looked quite high up. We decided to walk the bikes down the steps and save the potential embarrassment of being airlifted off the hillside with a broken hip. And at the end of the wooden steps, hooray! Another bloody gravel track with more bloody wooden steps. Whoop-de-doo. We waited to see if the walker would bugger off out the way, but no, why would he? So we carried on down the path. Eventually the gravel ended. This was it, time to go flat out. The only hurdle, some bloke in the distance. Would he hear us coming? Maybe not, but there was no way we were going to go slow down here, even if that meant a bit of collateral damage. You know what they say, if you're going to make omelettes, you got to use eggs. I've never really understood that saying, it doesn't make sense. You can't make omelettes without eggs. Anyway, downhill. He did spot us though, at the last minute, but thankfully no collision. No need to get any eggs. And no chance of those eggs getting on our faces. Quite fancy an omelette now though. I wonder if you can buy omelette mix. Perhaps that's what they mean. I'll Google it after.
Till I got real close, I thought it was a gap.
As we got nearer the bottom, I spotted what I thought was a gap in the fence. Luckily, I didn't go for this gap, as it wasn't a gap. It was just more fence, and I would have been shredded like a lettuce. So that was it. Downhill done, back onto the road, and for the foreseeable future, it was all uphill from here. My legs were like jelly, and I could barely hold the bike in a straight line. Rich, however, had no such problems. He was off like a shot as usual, and left me in the distance. If one of those fox boys he was on about came along, I'd be done for. There'd just be a load of bones left. But Rich eats uphill for breakfast. Actually, I asked him what he eats. Get this right, he has a cup of nuts and some quinoa, whatever that is, some porridge and 50 pork pies. No wonder he's got all that energy. I just have toast like everyone else. We passed a big load of horse poo. We continued on, and it didn't seem that bad. I was able to keep pace, maybe because it was on asphalt. The road actually started to dip down. Brilliant! But not for long. But I was finding it pretty easy going. I'd still rather be going downhill like him. Lucky git. I knew we were getting closer to the point where we would turn off the road, but couldn't actually remember where it was. I looked back to see how far we'd come and was surprised by the distance. Then looked across to see where we were going. It did look steep. Every time we came across some parked cars, I thought that was the point where we needed to exit the road.
That's where I went up. That's where I went up. No, it's not.
And the danger being that if we missed it, we would needlessly travel uphill and have to turn back, wasting precious energy.
Which I hope it is, because it means there's not a great deal of uphill left. But there is some.
The road did seem to go on for ages. Then suddenly something looked familiar about this corner. I was hoping to find a lay-by with some parked cars in it when we rounded the turn. This would mean that this is the point where we exit the road. And lo and behold, there it was. The path that would take us up the Aglusig. Then I remembered. This is going to be bloody hard work. Lacking the balance and physical strength, there was no way I was about to attempt to ride my bike up. And even Rich pushed his bike in this first section. But even just pushing the bike seemed to zap my energy. It was early afternoon by now, and approaching the hottest part of the day. The gradient began to increase, and what was already hard became bloody difficult. I couldn't remember at which point the uphill would stop and the downhill would start. I mean, it can't constantly keep going uphill. That just wouldn't work, it'd be stupid. We'd all be living on a slope. Most things that you put down would just roll away. There just had to be downhill soon. I could smell it. Rich hopped onto his bike and then in typical fashion buggered off into the distance. And I thought, if only I could, I'd be running up this hill with no problems. In the distance, I could see that Rich had stopped to wait for me. As I approached, Rich was lying on the ground in a casual manner, like he didn't have a care in the world. Smug git. His knees looked like Phil and Grant off EastEnders.
Wow. Used to go through there. Huh?
Rich stopped at a point where we usually take a slight detour. On previous runs, hopping over that gate can now be a nice little shortcut. But I saw a sign that said no trespassing, so knew that we had to take the long way round. And by the way, if you're watching this and you own that property, I've never taken a shortcut through there. I only added it in for dramatic effect and to move the plot along. Right, that's that cleared up. Back to the journey. So we'd made it to the top, and as I gasped for air, I heard the engine of a low-flying aeroplane. I began to hope that this was some sort of Red Cross airdrop arranged by Rich for exactly this point of the journey, or a big crate of Yorkie bars was going to be dropped out of the back. Hopefully the biscuit and raisin ones. They're my favourite, and they're packed full of chocolatey goodness. And biscuity and raisiny goodness. The plane disappeared out of sight, leaving not so much as an empty wrapper. This video's not sponsored by Nestle, by the way, but if they did want to send me a couple of crates of Yorkie bars, I'd be more than happy to receive them. If you're listening, Nestle. What with Rich being a bit of a local history expert, I asked him a few questions about the castle. Do you think they built the castle with the stone from here?
No, they don't think the stone from there. Look at the ground. Right, the far side's all really.
So is it all that high? And they dug so much? Or is that, they dug a big hole to get the stone and they made the big mound?
Hey, you see,
I don't know. I'm a bit scared for me. Where did all the stone go then?
Come on, in the Ice Age. Anyway, Crow Castle. There it was.
Why is it called Crow Castle?
Castle of the Crows. No fucker lived there, apart from crows and cocks.
A fascinating insight. I'm learning so much today, so it was time to move on. We were going to follow the cliff edge for a small bit and then veer off to the right onto the mountain. And I must admit, the views from up here were stunning. In the distance, the smoke that we'd seen earlier was now quite visible, and it appeared as though a significant fire was in progress. This in fact was a major incident. The fire had started on the 11th of July on the Llantysilio mountain and soon spread to the Horseshoe Pass. The Horseshoe Pass was closed for much of the duration of the fire. Numerous firefighters were sent to tackle the blaze for many weeks, one of them being Rich. Smoke from the fire could be seen from as far away as Chester and the Shropshire border. The smell of the fire, apparently, reaching as far as Rhyl. The fire took over 40 days to put out, and the North Wales Fire Service worked tirelessly in doing so, working both night and day. Once again, I started lagging behind. I would have really benefited from a delicious Nestle Yorkie bar. I wish I would have bought some to bring with me, because they're so reasonably priced as well. Nestle, you could contact me through YouTube if you wanted to. Just saying. The cliff edge seemed to go on endlessly, with just a little speck on the horizon that was Rich. And what I found surprising was this wasn't really uphill, it was predominantly flat, though I was finding it harder to pedal on grass than I had on the asphalt. I hadn't noticed how precariously I'd drifted towards the edge of the cliff, though from feeling the effects of a day's cycling, I don't think I would have felt anything if I had gone over the edge. I was in unfamiliar territory now, and even though I've done this route a few times before, I'm usually heading in the opposite direction, and taking the shortcut previously mentioned. I think Rich must have stopped to wait for me, as I seemed to be catching up. Or maybe finally he'd hit the wall and was completely out of energy. And then he disappeared off into the distance again as usual. Rich stopped to wait for me again. By this point, I didn't know what was keeping me upright as I wobbled towards Rich, hoping our stoppage would be for a long duration. But no, he's off again. So as Rich surged on ahead, I was greeted with even more uphill. Next time I do this, I'm going to do it from the opposite bloody direction. Have me tons of downhill. Eventually, it flattened out, and lo and behold, I could see some downhill. And as usual, wherever there's downhill, there's people in the way. That's nature's rule. You just got to live with it. So Rich navigated his way through the walkers, and then it was my turn. I passed the first set, but then held back to allow the second set to get out of the way. Meanwhile, Rich was on the downhill section, completely unhindered, And the one thing he knew that I didn't was which way to head. If I didn't spot which way he went, I could have just carried straight on, got lost, and then be at the mercy of those wolf brothers that Richard told us about earlier. I didn't fancy that. I didn't actually spot which way Rich went. Actually, that's really hard to say. That took about 5 takes to get right, and then it wasn't that good. But faced with the choice of reasonably easy and bloody hard, I knew which one Rich would have gone for. So I chose bloody hard. And I was right. As Richard dismounted, it gave me a chance to catch up a little bit. But by now I really had very little left, and once more the gap grew. Energy depleted, I stopped for a little bit, and noticed a little red helicopter buzzing around, which I'd thought I'd caught on camera, but I hadn't, as I found out later during editing. By now Rich was getting very close to the gate that would take us onto the mountain, and although I was a bit further back, I could also see it. Rich climbed over and waited for me at the top, and I slowly made my way to the gate. Actually, it's a stile, but I've said gate at least twice now, and I'm not going back to redub the audio. I told Rich about the helicopter.
It's a little red helicopter, did you see it?
He didn't seem interested, and then with what little strength I had left, lifted my bike over the stile. It's definitely a stile. Thankfully, Rich gave us a hand, or I would have just had to have dropped the bike on the other side.
Oh, where is it? That way? Is it? Is it big?
I mustered up enough energy to climb over the stile and get back on my bike. So that was it. We completed the second leg and we're now entering into phase 3, the mountain section. Next time, I'm gifted some lovely downhill and get to take the lead. We get to the top of the mountain and visit the airman's grave. Rich makes a brand new friend.
Well, the Cube was a good bike, I loved it.
That's what I bought, lovely race.
And I tell a terrifying tale from my past.
Up to the top pool, the giant troll lives there, and it's frightened the life out of me.
I'd rather be a real nobody than a fake somebody. Remember, that's wise words.